Hi there, Nigel Saunders of KW Bonsai. Years ago, I think it was 2003, I put together a little handout for our club meeting, and it was all about roots and root pruning. And for me, roots are very important on a bonsai tree. To me, they're the foundation of the tree. Without a good root base, the bonsai tree just isn't a bonsai tree to me. I've killed many trees trying to create a perfect root base on the tree, and I haven't regretted killing the trees. Sometimes my philosophy is, if it doesn't have a good root base, or if I can't create a good root base on a tree, then it'll never be a bonsai tree. So, yeah, I've killed a lot of trees trying to get my root base in order. And in the process too, I've learned a lot. And I'm getting pretty good at creating good root bases on bonsai trees now. So my philosophy of roots and that is basically in this handout. Even though it's old and maybe I would change some things on the handout now, I've decided just to present it in its unedited form. So here we go. Here's our guide on creating and maintaining your bonsai root base.
Creating and Maintaining Your Bonsai Root Base by Nigel Saunders. Before you can achieve an excellent root base on your bonsai tree, you must first learn exactly what is a good root base. Remember this rule: a good root base gets better with age. A bad root base gets worse. A mature tree usually has approximately 10 to 30 surface roots that are visible above the soil level. These roots flow from the vertical trunk down to the soil, where they spread in a radial pattern to a horizontal transition to the soil. The exposed parts of the root base are very important in giving the tree a look of stability and maturity. The roots are not usually exposed by soil erosion, as most books suggest, but they are exposed by root growth. Early in the life of the tree, the roots were hidden several inches below the soil surface. But as the tree grows and matures, the roots thicken just like the branches and the trunk. This causes the tops of the roots to slowly emerge above the soil level. These roots, which started out as fine feeder roots, are now large, thick, mature roots that blend into the trunk in both thickness and texture. A good root base will flow like a melted candle from the trunk to the ground. These radial roots maintain a circular cross-section as they grow and will eventually create a fluted trunk near the base of the tree. The balance and thickness of the surface roots and the even distribution of the roots around the trunk are important to maintain a round cross-section to the trunk and are vital in feeding and maintaining a good branch structure above. The roots are the foundation of your tree and are vital to its beauty and health. When root pruning and repotting your bonsai, keep in mind what you want to achieve years down the road. If you have a tree for 10 years, this means you have had only 10 chances to correct the root mass to perfection. Make every repotting count. What starts out as a fine feeder root will eventually become an important surface root. Treat each tree with the same amount of care and evaluation, whether it is a seedling or a mature bonsai tree. The earlier you begin on your root base, the better your tree will be. Luckily, Mother Nature is working on our side. Step 1. Begin at the time of the year before the bud activity starts to get active. Usually early April will do for hardy trees. For tropical trees, I would recommend the middle of June. You will need a hose with multiple settings. Jet, mist, shower are the ones I use most often. Other tools required are a root rake, root pruners, soil screens, pots, soil, and drainage material. Pick a work area in the shade and work on a sturdy table. Step 2. Put your tree on top of the table and scrape away your loose surface soil with a root rake down to the surface of the roots. Try not to damage the fine feeder roots. Scrape in a radial pattern away from the base of the trunk. With the root rake, loosen the roots away from the edges of the pot. Carefully lift the tree, roots, and soil out of the pot. Lift the tree from the base of the trunk and be careful not to damage any roots that have grown out the drainage holes or ones that are stubborn to come out. Examine the roots. If the roots are growing only around the edges of the pot, This means your soil is too moist in the middle of the pot. This can be corrected by increasing the drainage factor of your soil, or you can water less often. If the roots are dying near the edge of the pot but are healthy in the middle, this means you should water more often or use a soil with less drainage. Step 3. Place the tree on top of your table and wash all the soil away from the roots. Use the root rake to help loosen soil from crevices and tangled areas. With this combination of the root rake and the hose, you should be able to get your roots sparkling clean. In some of the areas with really fine roots, it is natural to get some tearing of the roots as you comb them out, but these areas probably need some thinning anyway. This will allow you to prune your roots without dulling your pruners, and will allow you to carefully examine the root structure and the condition of the roots. Remove any dead or rotted roots. Step 4. Starting with the top of the root mass, comb out all your roots in a radial pattern. Start at the base of the trunk and comb out towards the edge of the roots. Try not to tear the roots. You may have to get in with your fingers and untangle any roots that are intertwined. Turn the tree upside down and prune off all the long roots that have grown in circles around the bottom of the pot. All pruning cuts should be done parallel to the bottom of the pot. Prune off all roots growing straight down from the base of the tree. Root pruning can take quite a long time, so mist the roots every so often to keep them moist. Prune off all roots growing above the main radial roots. This happens more on smaller trees planted deeply in their pots. Prune off all roots growing below the radial root base also. Our aim is to achieve a flat radial root base, not a root base with multiple layers of radial roots. Half the work is now done. You should have reasonably flat root mass, with the roots combed in a radial fashion. Now the detail work begins, balancing the roots to an even thickness and pruning the roots for direction. Step 5. Our aim is to have a balance in the thickness of the surface roots. A general rule is to prune the thicker roots more severely and prune the thinner roots less. Any roots that stand out as being too thick compared to the rest should either be pruned off entirely or reduced to a stump very close to the root base. Any roots that emerge from the trunk and shoot off in a non-radial direction should also be removed or pruned close to the trunk. Each root emerging from the base of the trunk must have its own space, otherwise the roots start crossing each other and begin to become a tangled mess. Step 6. The rule of 2. Each root must divide from 1 root to 2, then from 2 to 4, and 4 to 8, and so on. This is the same rule we follow for the top branches of our tree. The most common mistake in root pruning is to prune a root, then have it divide into a mass of finer roots growing like a pom-pom from the original pruning cut. This pom-pom effect should be corrected the next year by choosing the 2 best roots and removing all the others. The 2 best roots will be on a flat plane that flows from the original single root, and the 2 roots chosen will divide into a natural looking Y. This rule of root pruning will help keep your roots in balance with the top of your tree, keeping just the right amount of roots in proportion to the branch structure. This will keep your tree healthy and reduce the tendency for thick, rapid branch growth in spring. With a flat radial root ball, it is very easy to have your new soil contact the roots without air pockets. Your roots will all get water and will have excellent drainage. The closer to the base of the trunk the surface root divides from 1 to 2, the better the surface roots will appear. Also, the shorter the internodes between further divisions, the better the roots will appear. This ramification is very important to give a miniature appearance to the roots and the tree. Try to develop a random look to your root divisions. Leave some roots longer for dividing into 2, and start some roots dividing as soon as you can. Have some of your roots divide into an offset Y pattern and leave others symmetrical. Leave the occasional crossing root crossed, as long as it is not a major root emerging from the trunk. Remember, Mother Nature breaks every rule, so we can too. Overall looks and styling a root base. A flat root base doesn't have to be flat from the trunk to the edge of the pot. Have a look at some full-size trees and try to mimic a style that suits your tree. Some basic styles are: 1. Flat root spread. This is a style where the surface roots are visible above the soil for almost the width of the crown of the tree. This is typical in an area with rich soil and dense shade. 2. Bell-shaped. This is the most common style where the roots come from the trunk and blend into the soil like the shape of a bell. The surface roots are visible for about half the diameter of the trunk. This style can be almost flat to quite a high extension of the trunk. 3. Special shapes. This is a category where the roots are dictated by the environment around the tree. Some examples are root over rock, trees growing on a riverbank, trees on a cliff, and tree roots weathered by nature. Any of these styles can look good, and it is a matter of artistic style and training to make them look natural. Problems and how to deal with them. 1. A thick taproot with very little else. This is actually not too big of a problem. The first year when your tree is being put in a pot, reduce the taproot in half with a horizontal cut. Select a deep pot. A typical black plastic nursery pot will do. Fill the pot about a third with a drainage layer of a fine gravel or stay dry. Add another thin layer of a good draining soil. Place the tree on top in a center of the pot and fill the pot with the same good draining soil mixture. When transplanting the second year, the pot should be full of new roots. You will have to decide where you want the root base to begin, then prune off all the roots above and below this level. If your root base is strong enough, then do some root pruning to balance the strength of the new roots. Replant with your new root base safely under the surface of the soil and in a shallow pot. This is very similar to air layering and can get you a very good root base in 4 to 5 years. 2. 1 or 2 large roots with little else. This is a similar situation to having one large taproot. The first year, prune off one of the large roots with a horizontal cut right to the base of the trunk. Prune the other root in half. Plant in a suitable pot with enough depth to position the trunk at the right angle and to bury the one long root. Your soil level should safely cover the root that is pruned off flush. After a year, new roots should have grown all around the root that was cut off flush. Do some light balancing of these roots. Then prune the second long root flush with the base of the trunk. Plant in a shallow container and let the roots grow. In your third transplanting, you will have quite a good flat radial root base. 3. Roots on only one side. Patience is required. A tree will try to grow roots all around the trunk. Prune the roots you have quite severely, and eventually the tree will grow roots in the missing areas. If none are appearing after a few years, you can slice off a section of the trunk where you want the roots to grow. This will interrupt the flow of the sap and cause roots to form around the wound. Make sure the slice removed is deep enough to cut right through the cambium layer. If the slice is not deep enough, the wound may heal too quickly to develop your new roots. 4. Octopus roots. These are established roots that go in every direction but ones we want. This root condition can take some time to correct. The first step is to plant your tree in a large, flat, oval, or round training pot. The pot should be large enough to allow your new radial root space to grow before hitting the edge of the pot. Selectively prune the existing roots, keeping any good parts of the roots and pruning off the bad parts. If you would end up removing too much of the root mass, then prune only every other root hard and prune the others lightly. The next year, prune the other roots hard and the ones you pruned the first year lightly. In time, your roots will develop exactly the way you want. 5. Roots that start off well but then go everywhere. This happens when a tree has been pot-bound. The roots are nicely shaped, but when they hit the edge of the pot, they are forced to take a new direction. This direction is usually straight down or 90 degrees to the left or right. This can be corrected by pruning off the pot-bound growth and leaving the good part of the root intact. The parts of the root mass you are keeping must have room to grow in a flat radial pattern, so either choose a larger pot or prune the good parts of the roots back further from the edge of the pot. This operation may also have to be done over the span of 2 years to avoid removing too much of the root mass at once. If spacing this operation over 2 years, work on every other root the first year and then the rest the second year. 6. too many fine surface roots. If you find you have too many surface roots, over 30, then keep the best shaped roots and prune off the ones in between. If you have too many surface roots, the root mass will fuse into one big lump. You will never see the surface roots thicken individually, and the trunk will never get the fluted ridges you desire. This is common in old Japanese trees. It is an interesting effect, but can spoil the character of the trunk. 7. Severe kink in the trunk just above the roots. This is very common with trees developed from a seed. This starts when the seed sprouts and the growth direction is not vertical. The stem must curve up and out of the soil. This puts a kink in the otherwise straight trunk. To correct this, you can either develop a new root base above the kink or prune your roots in a radial pattern, and over the year the kink will blend into the root base and disappear. To grow new roots above the kink, plant the tree deep in the soil and prune the bottom roots back hard. Eventually, you will see new roots develop above the kink. As the new roots develop, continue to prune back the old roots hard. 8. Roots that grow down, not out in a radial pattern. This is also a common condition. The roots are reasonably spaced, but grow almost straight down from the trunk. The best solution to this condition is to establish your flat radial pattern as soon as you can and let the vertical parts of the root blend into the trunk. Keep the vertical parts of the root in contact with the trunk, and over time they will fuse together. 9. Roots with a reverse taper. This is common on many tropical trees. It is a method nature uses as anchoring the tree into the ground to resist a tropical storm. This effect rarely looks good on a bonsai tree. The roots should be pruned back to a point where the root hasn't begun to thicken. This is usually fairly close to the trunk. If many of these roots exist, then prune back a third of them every year, and in 3 years they will all be corrected. 10. Establish surface roots that are a mess. This is common for many trees. The most popular fix is to just bury the root ball so no surface roots appear. This is not a good solution. The objective in this case is to work on a few of the worst roots at each repotting. Try to get each root you are working on to go in the right direction. If nothing can be done, then prune it off and wait for new roots to grow. Then maintain the new roots. A root base in bad shape can take years to look decent, but patience and time will prevail. Always keep your objective in mind and actively work towards them at each potting session. Conclusion. This chapter is geared towards tropical trees and deciduous trees. However, the exact same rules apply to coniferous trees. The only difference is the severity of root pruning at the time of repotting. With coniferous trees, do not prune major roots without having a network of fine feeder roots to support the tree. The amount the root mass can be reduced and shaped is a matter of observation and experience. It is better to be safe than sorry when root pruning. This does not mean that the tree is repotted with a light trim to your roots. Always work on the defects with every repotting. It is amazing to watch your root base develop over the years, knowing in the soil there's something to be proud of.
Thanks for watching, everyone. Nigel Saunders of KW Bonsai. We'll see you next time.